Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy afternoons to join us today. And thank you, Haley, for the brief introduction. I am Seth Cardwell. I'm the Community Development Associate on our team, and I'm going to kick it to Katie really quickly so she can do an introduction, and then we'll talk a little bit about our agenda and what brings us here today.
Hi, everyone. I am Katie C., sharing the same space with Haley and Seth. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
All right, so what's on the agenda for today? Today, you're going to learn all about EPA grants. So the first part of this presentation today, I'm going to give a quick overview of Mid-Atlantic TAB, who we are, and what the services are that we provide, and who our partners are. And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into EPA grants, and Katie's going to tell us how to get started on a fiscal year 2026 EPA Brownfield grant application. This is part one of a two-part webinar series. So part one will cover all of the basics of the EPA grants today, and in part two, we'll have in October, those will be state-specific webinars for each state in EPA Region 3. Those will be a little bit of a deeper dive where we'll meet state environmental agency representatives. You'll meet your EPA state project officer during that meeting. We'll discuss a little bit in greater detail the grant timeline, eligibility, and available funding. At that time, new grant guidelines should be released, so we'll also go over changes from last year's application requirements, and then we will also provide state environmental agency requirements and tips during that. So a little bit about us, Mid-Atlantic TAB. TAB stands for Technical Assistance to Brownfields, is a collaboration between leading programs across EPA Region 3. The TAB program provides technical assistance to communities and stakeholders to help address their brownfield sites and to increase understanding and involvement in cleanup, revitalization, and reuse. The TAB program is funded by the EPA and is available to all stakeholders at no cost to your community. And as the TAB provider for EPA Region 3, we cover West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania. And we are, like I said, we are a collaboration between leading partners across the region. So we ourselves are based out of West Virginia University. We've got partners at the University of Delaware Biden School of Public Policy and Administration, partners at our sister center at Marshall University, and the College of Architecture, Arts and Design Community Design Assistance Center at Virginia Tech. So for today's presentation, it will be me and Katie from the WVU team speaking. So here you'll see our folks from WVU as well as our program evaluation at WVU. And our partners at Marshall, University of Delaware, and Virginia Tech as well. So, quick overview, some of the services that Mid-Atlantic TAB provides and that we can help your community with are education and outreach. We can provide educational opportunities to help educate stakeholders in your community on brownfield redevelopment and its impacts. We provide grantee support to help communities and organizations better understand and apply for grant opportunities related to brownfield projects. So as you receive those grants, we're the kind of one-stop shop for you to get help or get your questions answered. We also provide EPA application support. That's part of the purpose of today's webinar, coupled with education and outreach, is offering support in finding and understanding those EPA grant applications and requirements. And we also provide technical assistance through brownfield projects, including assistance with site design, project financing, health remediation, and site preparation. So in other words, if you do not know what a brownfield is, or you're overwhelmed by the redevelopment process and what it might look like in your community, if you're afraid or have any questions about potential contamination or liability and don't know how to pay for the cleanup or redevelopment of a site that your community has on its hands, or you would like assistance coordinating with EPA or state agencies, then you've come to the right place. Let us help. So how can TAB help this grant season? So first is this two-part webinar series. We're working on part one today to understand these EPA grant applications. And then in part two in October, we'll have the more state-specific deep dive where we'll help connect you to the relevant state agencies and partners that you'll be working with as you apply for a grant. We can help with one-on-one consultations to help get you started and see where you are with your project. If you have any questions, to get those answered. We can provide thorough grant review throughout the process. So when the grant period opens, you can send us the prepared applications that you have, and we can help review those grants to make sure that they meet the guidelines and the eligibility. And we can provide post-award support as well. In other words, once again, reiterating, we're your one-stop shop to get all of those brownfields questions answered. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive now into looking into the EPA grants. These are what are referred to as MARC grants. That stands for Multi-Purpose Assessment Revolving Loan Fund and Cleanup. And you'll notice that we have a little dash through the R, and that is because for the upcoming cycle, revolving loan funds are not offered. So this year it will be Multi-Purpose Assessment and Cleanup. And looking a little bit about eligibility for these grants, who are the eligible applicants for them when they do open. Eligible applicants can include state, local, and tribal governments, general purpose units of local government, regional council or development agencies, nonprofit organizations, and quasi-governmental agencies. Do want to note down at the bottom that little asterisk 501c4 organizations are not eligible for assessment, multipurpose, or RLF grants, but are eligible for cleanup grants. So that's all on eligibility, and I'm going to kick it to Katie now to kind of do a deeper dive into some of the types of grants that you can apply for.
Thanks, Seth. So first, we're going to kick it off with assessment grants. We want to let you know about a little bit about what you can do if you would look to apply for an assessment grant. So they allow you the opportunity to conduct an inventory of brownfields within your community or your target area that you would eventually work to refine within your application. So that's, if you thought that you may have one or two in an area, but if you start to dig a little bit deeper or get some assistance to help do that, you can actually reveal that there are probably multiple brownfield sites within your community or your target area. But that's a great place to get started so that you can have a better sense of just how many you're dealing with and where they are within proximity to one another and start to prioritize within that area. The assessment grant also allows you to conduct general planning activities. I believe we do have a link that's included later in this slide deck that does list the EPA eligible planning activities. So that includes things like market studies, infrastructure evaluation. So if you want to get some assistance to cover taking a look at what is the condition of existing infrastructure at this site, do you need to do upgrades? Is there no infrastructure for a certain type of utility available at all? So that's just one example of some of the planning activities that can be done that can allow you to, again, look at the bigger picture and start to plan for that site or a couple of sites, so then you can refine it, and ultimately you may actually need to go for a cleanup grant later in the future. Community involvement, assessment grants can help you do that because it's really important that you involve the community with meaningful community engagement so that all the residents and stakeholders have a meaningful say in what the future of their community is going to be when you're looking to either clean up or revitalize brownfield sites. And then it does allow you to also work on site-specific cleanup planning. So again, if you've taken on this inventory, you start to get an idea of numerous brownfield sites, and then you whittle it down to where with the next round of applications or next couple of rounds, you want to look to apply for a cleanup grant. Again, the funding that you can receive through an assessment grant can set you up to get you ready for applying for a cleanup grant. Some types of assessment grants include community-wide, and these are recommended for communities who want to be able to tackle brownfield issues within a particular area, right? So, and the nice thing about your target area is it can actually be pretty generous in size. And so when you actually apply with your application, you would identify some key sites that you would like to focus on. But when you actually get down to it and should you actually receive that grant, you'll find that the grant does generally give you some flexibility so that your list can evolve throughout the duration of the grant. So, if you become aware of a brownfield site that maybe you just were not aware of at the time of the application, it is good so that, again, you can just kind of, as long as you're keeping it within your target area, you can actually focus on those. So those are great. We we actually had one ourselves before we became a tab provider, and there's so much good that you can do. Again, it allowed us to do phase one, phase two environmental site assessments, and also some planning work. And one example of the planning work that came out of ours was actually a tourism study. Coalition grant. This is good if this is a good one to have if you have a more experienced entity who has some experience with brownfield grants. They can take the lead and then they can partner with two or more eligible entities. So it's a really good opportunity for those who are just kind of dipping their toes in the water of the brownfield grant world to get a sense of what's all this about. So it's a good opportunity to to have some different focus areas, and it's a good collaboration effort. So if you have a regional area, again, this coalition grant would be a good opportunity for that, because it allows, again, some lower capacity communities to learn from the benefits and experience of those who have come before. And also then there are state and tribal grants for assessment grants. State of West Virginia, for example, they've had one for a few years now, and I know we often point folks in their direction. So if we find that someone says, hey, I've got this small brownfield site, I don't know where to begin. I do think I need to take on a phase one environmental site assessment. What is that? How can I start? State grants like that are incredibly helpful when the environmental agency for the state has that, and they can provide that assistance throughout their target area as well. So just an example of how that can work. And those are great tools and how you can tap into those. Okay, next we have cleanup grants and with their uses and the considerations. So when you have a cleanup grant, you're generally applying for one site. Could be two sites, but it depends on the cost estimate you believe it may take to actually clean up the site. So when it actually comes to applying for the cleanup grant, you have to have had a phase one environmental site assessment. You may also hear it called the all appropriate inquiry, or AAI. So you must have that completed within 6 months or less prior to the purchase or ownership transfer of the property site. You may find that there could be a phase one that already exists for a site, but if you're actually looking to apply for a cleanup grant and that phase one was actually conducted maybe 2 years ago, you need to refresh that. And so generally it's not as expensive to kind of just refresh that, get an environmental qualified environmental consultant to actually conduct that work. But that is the part that makes you eligible for an EPA cleanup grant. So again, they kind of view the phase ones as having a shelf life of 6 months. So again, we're going to cover this a little bit more, but the timing of when a phase one environmental site assessment is conducted and when you may need to transfer ownership is really important, because the phase one environmental site assessment is what can protect you from liability for any contamination that happened on site. So again, cleanup and remediation of one or more sites. It is typically limited to the site-specific planning for the cleanup for that site, right? So we're not talking about area-wide planning that you could be doing with an EPA assessment grant, but you're actually talking about what may be relevant to refine planning for this site that we're applying for a cleanup grant. And in order to apply for a cleanup grant, the applicants must have had, in addition to a phase one environmental site assessment, also a phase two environmental site assessment or the equivalent site investigation reports completed before you submit the application. And we would always encourage you to reach out to your EPA project officer, or we can try to help you as well to understand, hey, would you say this is equivalent to a phase two? Because phase two is what's going to give you this information about just how contaminated may this site be, and where are the locations, the hot spots on the site where we actually need to focus the cleanup of the site. And again, the site must be owned by the applicant at the time of the application. So kind of thinking about back to the phase one environmental site assessment, again, you've got to have that done, but then the actual entity who's applying for the cleanup grant has to be the owner. So it's really important that, it can't be It can't be owned by anybody else, has to be the applicant. Okay, talking about multi-purpose grants. So you just heard a little bit about assessment grants and a little bit about cleanup grants. As you can imagine, multi-purpose kind of blends the two together. So it's good for communities who have identified an area that has one or more brownfield sites. And the activities for multi-purpose grants include, again, developing the brownfield inventory sites so you can get a sense of, again, just how many are we dealing with. Again, the community engagement activity, so you can get that meaningful community engagement. Environmental site assessments, again, developing cleanup and reuse plans that pertain to the brownfield site. And then, of course, the cleanup activities on a brownfield site owned by the applicant. So that comes into play again. So just like with the cleanup grant, you have to own the property. You have to own the property that you want to clean up for a multi-purpose grant. Probably a good time to say here that when it comes to the assessment grant, I didn't point that out, but you actually do not have to own any of the sites that you actually want to conduct the assessments on. And you don't even need to want to own them. It's okay to get a sense of that, to see, what might the history be of that. So ownership, not a big deal, other than getting permission to actually conduct the assessments. Back to multi-purpose grants, again, it can help you develop the overall plan for revitalization. One thing I just want to point out, extra steps for this, again, is that the site that you're going to clean up must be owned by the applicant by the grant deadline. So that grant deadline has not yet been announced for this year, but you need to make sure, again, if this is on your radar, that you are able to take ownership by the deadline. And also you need to verify the phase 1 environmental site assessment timing. All right, a few extra steps we always like to point out for cleanup grants include, again, verify the timing of ownership transfer. We're repeating this often because it is incredibly important, and unfortunately it will keep you from being eligible at all to even apply for the cleanup grant. This is reviewed at the threshold criteria, and if you're not eligible, your grant application just cannot even proceed, because again, if there was a timing issue with the ownership or the entity is not eligible, then your application won't be considered, unfortunately. So please verify that, take the time to go through that. Also with the cleanup grant, you have to give notification of the actual application. So the community notification has to be posted at least 2 weeks before the application submittal. I want to point out that this is when your entity is looking to actually submit the grant application and not the grant deadline. So, the grant deadline might be November 15th. If you are looking to apply on November the 2nd, it needs to be 2 weeks before your submittal date of November 2nd. You want to provide the notice of the meeting for the grant application and also provide a location of what's called the ADCA. Oh gosh, Carrie's on here and she's gonna think I'm crazy. I'm drawing a blank, but it's the analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives, right? I think I'm right. But that is what's conducted once you've had the phase 2 environmental site assessment. And then those next steps give you a sense of what are the options for actually cleaning up this site. So if we look to clean it up to standard 1, 2, or 3, what are those general standards and how much does that cost? So again, you need to make that document, that ADCA, available for those who are interested in learning more about this grant to actually take a chance or to take the time to actually review the document. So again, community notification, you want to publish it at least 2 weeks before your application deadline. You want to make sure you've provided all the details about when to hold the meeting, and then also make that document available. And so that's really important. And then the public meeting must be held before you submit the application. This is where we always like to encourage, and we've got plenty more resources and webinars that talk about this. But when we talk about a public meeting, you have a little bit of creativity here, and we encourage you to be as creative as you can be. You can tag it onto an existing meeting that is, going to be pretty robust and open to a wide array of stakeholders. And but as long as you're giving them the opportunity to have some good discussion and answer any questions that you may have. So again, we want to encourage you to be creative. If you've got a city council meeting, it's something you could tack on kind of at the beginning of that so that folks are already looking to attend a council meeting. Shout out to the community in West Virginia here who had like some bounce houses and things like that for theirs. So Carrie and I were just, our director and I were just talking about that the other day. So again, you can really be creative. So anyway, I went off on a tangent. All right, so coming soon, we don't have this yet, but eventually we will have the EPA's anticipated funding for the fiscal year 26 EPA Brownfield grant applications. Don't have that available for this webinar, but by the time we have kind of the part 2 state-specific webinars, you'll have an idea of that. And so when it comes to revisions for last year's application, new grant guidelines are expected to be announced by the EPA in early to mid-September of this year, so next month, which is what we're being told. So, we will constantly be checking to see if that announcement comes out, and we will let you all know as soon as we know. But keep your eyes peeled for that. And this topic, again, for the upcoming grant application for fiscal year 26 is going to be covered with more specifics in the state-specific webinars in October. And again, really there, as Seth was mentioning, we start to focus on what are the changes from last year's grant application cycle to this one. So that's where we work to highlight what you should focus on. We want to, again, the reason we're holding this webinar now is when we want to encourage you to be preparing now before these grant guidelines are released, because there is certainly plenty that you can do. So if you are applying for the first time, so you've got your intention is to apply as a new application, please take a look at last year's applications for fiscal year 25. So of course, those are closed. You're going to get a copy of this slide deck. And so when you get that, you'll be able to click on the hyperlink here, but that's got the guidelines. So we encourage you to go ahead and take a look at those guidelines from last year. Generally, not much changes from last year to this year. Don't know what changes will be happening from last year to this year, but there's so much that you can go ahead to take a look at and get started on in terms of your narrative and understanding, again, the threshold criteria, because again, there actually is a threshold review. So you'll see that in the application. And again, you got to be able to go past threshold before your application is even reviewed. So start to get familiar with that. When it comes to a cleanup grant, so if you're looking to apply for a cleanup grant, please go ahead and reach out to your state environmental agency. They are going to prepare something for you called a site characterization letter to let you know what needs to happen on this site. So go ahead and be doing that. And to also, when it comes to the cleanup site, confirm the eligibility of the applicant. So again, we were touching on that a little bit earlier. Seth highlighted that with the slide to let you know which types of entities are eligible. Of course, more information is available through the links there. And then you also want to verify the timing of your phase 1 environmental site assessment. So again, you absolutely don't want to be answering that question if you haven't had a phase 1 when these grant guidelines happen, because it could take a little bit of time for you to kind of think about the process and identify who may conduct that, because you actually need a qualified environmental professional. So please go ahead and start working on these tasks. Familiarize yourself with the previous guidelines, again, the threshold criteria, and also forms that must be submitted. And you'll notice that the forms is a hyperlink as well. Please make sure that your CM.gov and grants.gov accounts are up to date. Unfortunately, sometimes that can take a while. Those websites are independent of the EPA. They are federal. So sometimes if you've got some type of an issue there, it can take a little bit longer for various reasons. So please go ahead and take a look at that, either if you need to set up an account, if you need to renew your account, which I'll touch on that a little bit later, does need to be done once a year, or if you need to just change information. So you may have the information available, but maybe the previous contact person is no longer at your agency, so you want to update that. Reach out to your EPA project officer before solicitations open. Again, we'll have their information listed later in the slide, but feel free to reach out to them. You have some really great project officers in EPA Region 3. So it's going to list it. Our list here is by state. So go ahead and reach out to them once the solicitations open or the new guidelines are announced. Unfortunately, you cannot be asking questions like that. That's when you're going to come to us. Also get to know your state environmental agency. We also have really good relationships with those from the various states and DC within EPA Region 3. So we encourage you to go ahead and reach out to them too. And then, of course, contact us with any questions or if you would like some help reviewing your draft or maybe a section. I'm not going to repeat all of this again, but this is the same thought. If you were unsuccessful last year and you are doing a revision to the fiscal year 25 application, again, so much of this is the same, where again, you want to review the previous application, identify where you may need to improve. And so if you had an EPA debrief, please take a look at that and pay attention to that, incorporate those changes. If we provided some feedback, please go ahead and do that. If you want to share that with us and you didn't already, let us know. You know, we could still give you some feedback on that. Again, for the cleanup grant, go ahead and reach out to your state environmental agency. If you received, so you would have received a letter last year from them, from your state environmental agency to apply for your grant. You cannot use last year's. So for your cleanup grant, you got to get a new one. So they're going to, update, change the date, but please, you cannot recycle and use last year's. Again, familiarize yourself with the forms, make sure sam.gov is up to date, and of course, always reach out to us. Just some more information about sam.gov. This just provides you with the link. It lets you know what information you need when you go to sam.gov. If you want to, again, check the status, register, or actually renew your sam.gov account. So keep this in mind. Again, this is going to be made available to you after this webinar. And again, as discussed earlier, you can see your state contact for your environmental agency and then also your EPA project officer that's specific to your state. Again, these are wonderful people. We have great relationships with them. If you would like any help with kind of facilitating an introduction to any of these folks, we'd be happy to help you. So please take that into consideration. Upcoming events, we want to let you, oh yes, thank you so much, Haley. Haley has just published a quick poll. We hope that you will take that. It helps us to gauge the resources that we provide and see if you found it helpful or not. That's okay. We need to know that too. So please take that. For upcoming events, we have Haley and Becca. They are our outreach experts. I don't even have enough good words to say about it, that they've been working really hard on the upcoming West Virginia Brownfields and Main Street Conference. So if you're in the vicinity of Morgantown, West Virginia, we would encourage you to come. It is a really good conference, a lot of good networking, a lot of great information, and it's the 20th year. So there's still time to register. It's September 9th through the 11th, so we would encourage you to come. On September 24th, we have a webinar that you can register for, and it has to do with how to make your community engagement exciting. So just as I was discussing bounce houses, I may have given a little bit away, but we want to encourage you to think outside the box. So consider attending that if you would like some ideas. And then soon we will be announcing the specific webinars for each state. Again, that's going to be happening in conjunction with the state environmental agencies and also the project officers. Just kind of wrapping up some of the members of our team. Again, we are here to help you. All of our services are free. Doesn't matter how simple or silly you think the question might be, please don't hesitate to ask. I ask my boss plenty of silly and random questions on a daily basis, and she still answers. So that's what we're here for. Yeah, so we are available to answer any of the questions that you may have. So give us a shout. And this slide is going to let you know how you can do so. So if you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to the link tree, which is going to give you the links for all of our social media connections. You can also email us, sign up for an individual consultation, and you'll notice down below in the bottom of the slide, it also has some direct links.